this session of the Herman P. and Sophia Taubman Endowed Symposium on Jewish Studies for nearly 30 years of bright cultural beacon in the Santa Barbara Jewish community. What better venue than our city's Bronfman Family Jewish Community Center to have this event? In fact, as I look out, I see many faces that I haven't seen in some time. The pandemic made a big dent in our attendance for quite a while, and we've been virtual for most of the events, with just a live event here and there, but we hope to change that. We have 2 live events this year, this one and one more, and next year hopefully yet more. So, and the Jewish Community Center seems like a perfect place. Look at the turnout. I'd like to thank the Center's Executive Director, Cindy Silverman, for so generously providing this room for today's symposium and also for the light refreshments to follow. Today's Taubman speaker is Professor Wolf Gruner of USC, who will introduce us to his new book, Resistors: How Ordinary Jews Fought Persecution in Hitler's Germany, published by Yale University Press in 2023, not so long ago. The title already gives you the book's theme, so I won't say anything further about it other than it was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award in the Holocaust category, which in itself is quite a distinction to be a finalist. I'll mention then briefly here too that signed copies of the book will be on sale after the presentation, just outside the doors. You will have seen that on your way in. Thanks to Chaucer's Books. A word then about Professor Gruner. He's a native of Berlin, did his education there, BA and PhD, the BA at Humboldt University, and the PhD at Technical University, 1989 and 1994 respectively. He's held a number of academic posts, most importantly since 2008. He's been the Professor of History and Shapell Guerin Chair in Jewish Studies at USC. Since 2014, he's the founding director of USC's Dornsife Center for Advanced Genocide Research. In the 7 years, 2017 to 24, he was the Director of Genocide Studies in the Collective Convergence Initiative for the development of USC library and archival collections. In addition, he's held various honorific temporary posts at several universities and institutes nationally and internationally from around 1994 to 2007. For his work, he's garnered quite a few fellowships and awards. For example, as already mentioned, a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award for Resistors. In 2017, the Sybil Halpern Milton Memorial Book Prize for the German Studies Association for the best book in Holocaust studies, published in 2015-16. Again, quite an award. Distinguished researcher of the Institute of Nanjing Massacre History and International Peace in Nanjing, China in 2017. And also in 2012 for his book, The Greater German Reich and the Jews, he received a prize for the book as one of the most outstanding studies in the humanities and social sciences. Over the course of, let's see how many years, 27 years, published 10 books. Now, that's quite prolific when you think about it. How often a book has got to come out in another time to publish 10 books. 4 further books are co-edited with 2 more, yet 2 more soon to appear. Over 20 articles, books, and chapters, and a host of other publications far, far too numerous to mention. He has a leadership position in the field with numerous conference papers. He's well known, panel participation, a member and organizer of panels, and a conference organizer and co-organizer. So he's distinguished himself considerably, and we're very glad to have him here today. I will then turn the program over to him. Please help me welcome Professor.
Can you hear me? No? Sufficient?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Lee, and everybody who made this event happen. I'm really appreciative to be here and to present the book. And just a small addition to the long introduction, it just got another prize, this finals for the Yad Vashem International Book Prize. So it was well received. But that's not the important thing. Much more important are the stories I want to share with you today. And what I want to do in this presentation is, first I tell one story, kind of give a closer look to one story, And then I will explain a little bit why we didn't see actually these stories until now. And afterwards I will give you a brief overview about the different types of individual resistance. And the book is kind of divided in 5 chapters. Each chapter has one main story of one person, and then at the end of each chapter I show that each story is just the tip of the iceberg, with kind of briefly going into other stories. So kind of similar what I try to do here. Okay, let me start with the first story. This is the year 1940, so during the Second World War. Picture Frankfurt in Germany. And all of the stories I have to mention are from Nazi Germany proper and Austria, but not from Poland or other occupied territories. So imagine it's the evening in the fall, one evening in the fall of 1940. It's pitch black dark because there was a brownout because of Allied bombing raids in Frankfurt. And each night, Hans Oppenheimer, a 17-year-old boy, leaves his house, breaks the curfew, which was introduced for Jews a year ago, earlier, and waits for the Allied bombers to kind of closing in on Frankfurt. When they start dropping their bombings, he rushes to the next fire alarm post and sets off a fire alarm, but a wrong one, to divert the firefighters from the actual bombing burned houses to kind of the streets where he's in. So he does this each night, and the question is really, how does a 17-year-old Jewish boy from Frankfurt kind of develops the idea to kind of set off these wrong fire alarms? So he was the firstborn son of a Jewish, well-off Jewish family. His father had a kind of a shop where he sold kind of accessories to tailors in Frankfurt. They lived in, on an imposing, nice boulevard in Frankfurt, East End, where a lot of wealthy Jewish families lived. And in 1933, he graduated from elementary school. And because of the changing circumstances in Germany with the takeover by Hitler, the parents enrolled him not in a public middle school, but in a private Jewish middle school, which was very famous at the time, the Philanthropian in Frankfurt. It was founded by Rothschild in the 19th century, and the parents thought that they would, the private school would kind of, in a way, shield a little bit the students from the increasing hostile environment in Frankfurt or in Germany entirely. So, in 1937, he graduated from middle school with good grades, but then he decided not to go to high school. He could have actually stayed in the Philanthropian until kind of finishing high school, because for 2 reasons. On the one hand, he wanted to do an apprenticeship to acquire kind of skills, kind of like handicraft skills, to kind of sustain his family, because in the meantime, after 1933, his father has lost his shop. So there was no income, and the public depended on public welfare. The second reason was long-term, because he thought with the increasing hostile environment in Germany that he won't have a future. And so he thought to get a good skill will help him kind of to leave Germany and find a future somewhere else. And he did this because since 1933, especially in Frankfurt, which was the city with the second biggest Jewish population in Nazi Germany, was especially hostile towards the Jewish inhabitants. The new Nazi mayor, immediately when he took over in 1933, cut off business ties with Jewish enterprises. He dismissed Jewish employees from the municipality. Frankfurt as a city was the first city in Germany who cut off, or not cut off, but reduced welfare benefits for poor Jews. And they were also one of the first Aryanizing Jewish art collections, real estate, and so on. So living in Frankfurt was increasingly difficult for Jewish families. So when he started his apprenticeship in 1937, this was again in a Jewish school, a Jewish vocational school, which had just recently been established exactly for the same reason why Hans Oppenheimer went there, to prepare Jewish teenagers for living abroad, to kind of give them skills as blacksmiths, gardeners, and so on. So he got his apprenticeship, and in 1939, a few months after Kristallnacht, he went to the labor office in Frankfurt to get his first job. However, the labor office actually didn't give him a job. They sent him to one of the first forced labor camps for Jews. This was one of the early labor camps, which is not so well known, of an early forced labor program for unemployed Jews, which was established right after Kristallnacht. So he had to leave Frankfurt and lived for 9 months as a 16-year-old boy in a forced labor camp. He came back from this labor camp in 1940, and this was a time where this forced labor program was expanding. There were several 10,000 Jewish men already constructing roads, cleaning kind of streets, removing garbage, and so on. He was sent to another forced labor camp, and this one was extremely, more extreme than the first one, because the mayor of the city who established the camp was especially anti-Semitic, and he kind of ordered beatings of the forced laborers to enhance productivity. He segregated them from the Jewish town people, from the non-Jewish town people, and the kind of conditions were so bad in this forced labor camp that, and this is 1940, yeah, this is very early, that one of the forced laborers committed suicide in this camp. So when Hans kind of experienced these conditions, this must have done something to him. And so when he was released from the second labor camp and he went back to Frankfurt, this is when he took the decision to set off these wrong fire alarms. Unfortunately, he was caught after a few weeks. Because of the curfew, he would not leave his house for longer distances. So he never went far. So he used only 3 different fire alarm posts. And on one occasion, on December 10th, 1940, he was caught by the fire police, red-handed, in the act when he wanted to push the button. So he was arrested and waited 4 full months in pre-trial detention. And then he was indicted by the main prosecutor of Frankfurt, and for kind of several felonies according to the criminal code, and also under a new law which was established during the war, or introduced in the war, against so-called public vermins. The written indictment emphasized that Hans Oppenheimer was a full Jew, and that according to the Gestapo, who had kind of interrogated him, he was seen as an unstable, lazy, and dishonest human being. This was written in the indictment. And he would be eager to destroy things. So that was kind of the assessment by the Gestapo. He had only admitted to 9 wrong fire alarms. But the indictment actually, in the indictment, the prosecutor assumed that he was actually responsible for way more. They had evidence that there were 44 wrong fire alarms, but they could not prove them to him because he never admitted them to more than 9 fire alarms. And the series of fire alarms started when he came back from the labor camp and mysteriously kind of ended when he was arrested. Yeah, so you make the calculation here. So they actually tried to bring him to the German People's Code, the Nazi People's Code, which was very notorious and often kind of handed out death penalties. But they could not establish real legal ground to bring him there. So in the end, he was tried in Frankfurt, and he was then 18 years old now, and had no public defender. And there was a discussion if he should be tried under adult law or as a teenager. In the end, the judge did not follow the prosecutor and tried him as a teenager. However, he emphasized in his verdict that he, as a Jew, should have paid special attention to the German laws because he is supposed to be only a guest in Germany. He received 3 years in prison for the wrong fire alarms. He was transferred to a small prison, not so far from Frankfurt, but from the first day on, he was immediately put in solitary confinement. He had to work as any prisoners in Germany, kind of folding envelopes day in, day out, but he was totally kind of isolated from other prisoners, and he only saw the prison guards. This took a rapid toll on him, physically and emotionally. He also developed illnesses, and he did not get kind of good health kind of treatment in prison. And after a while, this was really kind of getting to him. And he kind of wrote in the letters to his family, to his parents, he begged them to bring medicine to him and help him kind of to get out. He did not know that his messages, some of his messages never reached the parents because they were kind of censored by the prison warden, because he was too outspoken about the miserable conditions in prison for him. When his health and his kind of psychological state deteriorated rapidly, he tried twice to commit suicide in prison. He was only 18 years old, right? But unsuccessfully. The guards, 2 times they saved him. And the parents kind of in one letter begged him to kind of change his behavior and be not so rebellious. And he then wrote back to him in one of these confiscated letters and said, "You know best," yeah, this is a quote to his parents, "You know best that I never had the chance to visit a cinema, a cabaret, or a theater. And when I think about my life, I can go crazy." After 2 years in prison, he was transferred from the small prison in Hesse to Auschwitz under an agreement between the head of the SS and the new Reich Minister for Justice. They agreed to move all Jewish prisoners to concentration camps, which was at this time then the destination was Auschwitz. Because of his weakened physical and emotional state, he did not survive for long. His death is recorded in Auschwitz in January 30th, 1943, a few weeks after he arrived, and this was only a few days after he turned 20 years old. Okay, what does the story of Hans Oppenheimer tells us and reveal about the individual reactions and responses of Jews in Nazi Germany? So, in a lot of the Nazi reports, Gestapo, SS, and so on, we can read actually the frequent mentioning of the so-called impudent Jew. And we, as historians, often thought, or mostly thought, the Nazis just put this in to justify new harsher measures against the Jews. But I think we have to kind of reconsider this. Because, for example, in July 1935, there were kind of riots against Jews in Berlin. And the Gestapo report from July 1935 said, Jews are born with disrespect for state authority. Interesting. And at the same time, more than 100 Jews were arrested during this month for offenses against the state or the Nazi party. So you can make the equation here. So what I think now is that actually this frequent mentioning of impudent Jews kind of points us to a kind of forgotten reality of widespread acts of individual Jewish resistance acts. And just to give you a number, not only are these kind of these tropes of the impudent Jew often mentioned in reports, at the time when Hans Oppenheimer was in prison, there were 1,200 Jews in German prisons. At this time, only 55,000 Jews were left. If you make the relation, it would mean that for kind of resistance acts, when you take the number of the US population of 330 million, it would mean 6 million people would be for resistance incarcerated. 6 million. So that's the relation at the time. Yeah? So that's quite a lot of people actually arrested for individual acts of defiance and resistance. So my research over the last decade revealed that hundreds and hundreds of Jewish men and women resisted in different ways against the Nazi persecution. And I think that we need to reassess what Jewish reactions actually meant at the time in Nazi Germany proper. My research strongly challenges the old idea that Jews in general, but especially German Jews, were rather passive, did not resist. And the question is, why did we assume that, that they were passive? And I think, for me, for my research, I see two main reasons. The first one is conceptual. What do we understand what resistance is? Historians discussed resistance immediately already during the Second World War. And most historians focused on what you all know, like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the partisans, right? Uprisings in extermination sites or in ghettos. But when you take this kind of the whole Europe, this is kind of, these seemed like isolated incidences. And from the beginning there was a challenge, especially from survivors in Israel. They said, no, there was also day-to-day resistance, there were other forms of resistance, but most historians would kind of, in a way, settle with, okay, resistance was usually group resistance, organized, armed, and only happened in Eastern Europe. So, therefore, I think we don't find stories like Hans Oppenheimer in the literature about the Holocaust or on Nazi Germany. Even in books which emphasize the Jewish voices, like the widely acclaimed books by Saul Friedlander, he hasn't mentioned or systematically, or never really investigated systematically this phenomenon. So what I tried to do is, I tried to broaden the concept of what resistance is, and I took a definition which we usually use, which is from Yehuda Bauer, the just recently passed away in Israel, very prominent Holocaust historians. And what I did is I just added individual to his definition, because his definition was focusing on group resistance. And I think when you add this one word, it changes everything. It changes our whole perspective. And I want to show you why. But first I want to say, this is not really, original. I'm not the only one thinking about this. Already in the 1950s, an Israeli survivor, Meir Dvorjetsky, came up with similar ideas. Later on, an Australian colleague, Konrad Kwiet, in the 1970s and 80s, and an East German survivor, Helmut Eschwege. And then similar ideas are also kind of discussed by anthropologists like James Scott or by researchers on US slavery. So it's not very unique. I just kind of focus here on our research on the Holocaust on this. So when we take this definition, it allows us to include other forms of behavior to like non-conformity, defiance, protest, to see them as resistance. So the question is then, when we have this different definition, why or how does it change our lens? And let me show you this. So this is a picture which you can find in standard works on the Third Reich. It shows Michael Siegel in the center with the cut-off pants. He was dragged by stormtroopers through the city of Munich. We usually thought this is a random act of early terror against Jews. But if you look closer, he has a sign around his neck. And the sign says, "I won't complain at the police station anymore." So what he tried to do was to release a client of his, he was a lawyer, who had been arrested. So this was not random, this was a targeted act of terror. Or this picture. This I use in my classes to illustrate initiatives from local institutions, from municipalities, who were often forerunners even before Nazi laws were enacted. So, for example, access to public swimming pools. But then look at her body language. Why is she even taking this picture, or let somebody take this picture? I think we have to reconsider. This was not so much about kind of the not having access, but to be defiant in the face of not having access. Or the family marks. The son is taking this picture a day after this notorious slogan was painted on the wall of the family house in a small town in West Germany. And they smuggle out this negative later on. And my favorite, I mean, you have seen this probably at the book. This is my favorite picture. This is Lizzie Rosenfeld, a Jewish woman in Vienna in 1939. And she sits on the bank, for those who don't read German, only for Aryans, so not for Jews. And look at how she kind of embraces this, yeah? I mean, just see how this picture, and then she let her friend take this picture, and then she smuggles the negative out so that we have it now in the Holocaust Museum in DC. So I think already this shift kind of is visible in pictures which we have seen, but kind of looked very differently upon and thought about very differently. And the last picture is this one. This is actually, the picture itself is an act of resistance because it shows the destruction of a Jewish home during Kristallnacht. This is, by the way, the topic of my next book is the overlooked destruction of Jewish homes during Kristallnacht. My current estimate is more than 10,000 homes were destroyed, which we also never can read in books because we focus on synagogues and shops. But Jewish homes were on a mass scale destroyed and people were also beaten up and so on. But you see, this, just the homeowner taking a picture is an act of defiance. Okay, so this is what I try to do in the book, is to focus on these individual acts. And I really leave out group resistance because kind of this is for somebody else to do. There's some overlap also, but to really highlight individuals who did this alone, on their own decision, often without the knowledge of their families or friends, and under heavy risk, as you will see and have seen with Hans Oppenheimer too. The second reason, which I didn't mention, why didn't we see these individual acts, well, is a question of sources. Previously, historians have used mostly to understand Jewish attitudes in Nazi Germany, they have used these administrative reports from the SS and the Gestapo. Then they have used diaries, letters, and other kind of testimonies. But in both kind of sets of sources, there is not much mentioning of individual resistance. The Nazis didn't want to highlight Jewish resistance, obviously, but the Jews themselves censored themselves also in their ego documents because, for two reasons. One, they would not like to mention something what could have been read by the Nazis. But then on the other hand, they had also this understanding of resistance as group resistance. So they didn't even think what they did was resistance. Okay, so what I tried to do is to come up with a whole new set of sources which I found in German archives. I went to more than a dozen of municipal archives in first Berlin, then Frankfurt, Munich, Leipzig, Hamburg, Dresden, Frankfurt, and so on. And then I found my kind of stories in police records, in court records. These are the kind of main sources. And then I added a review of 170 interviews from the USC Show Foundation of survivors. And this is kind of the set of sources which I worked with. So let me spend the rest of the time to introduce you to the different forms of Jewish resistance which I kind of identified. So I came up, or I have to, let me take a step back. Since I found so much, there was a question, how do I organize actually these different acts of resistance? They were so different. So I came up with these 5 categories. And most of my stories actually can you see? Yeah. Fall under these 5 different rubrics. And this is also how the book is organized. Each chapter is one of these rubrics. So, let me give you a few stories for each of the different categories to kind of highlight a little bit what I see under these names. So the first one is contesting Nazi propaganda, which includes anti-Jewish propaganda and so on. And we find mentioning in police records very early on in 1933, which we would expect that there were people also protesting against anti-Jewish propaganda, but it kind of also included ripping down Nazi flags, destroying anti-Jewish posters, or besmearing displays of anti-Semitic newspapers. And the main story in the book is the one of David Bornstein. He was a merchant in Hamburg, and on one very nice summer day in 1936, he accompanied his wife to the bus terminal because she wanted to visit her parents. And while waiting for the departure of the bus, he tried to destroy the swastika logo on the public bus. Here you can see a kind of magnified photo. I hope you see the scratches on the swastika. So he tried with a walking stick, with a cane, to kind of scratch the logo of this public bus. And what he did was, this was the situation. This is not David Bornstein. This is kind of one of the first instances of historical reenactment. This was a Gestapo officer, this one, impersonating David Bornstein. And then up there, this is supposed to be his wife. So they chatted through the window while he was kind of scratching. This is the bus conductor who denunciated him. Yeah? So he was arrested and got 5 weeks in jail for this crime, to destroy the swastika logo. He got out of jail, but then there was, in 1938, an initiative to incarcerate all Jews with criminal records into concentration camps. So he ended up, because of this, in a German concentration camp. He survived, fortunately, and after a few months got released and got out immediately and went to Palestine and survived. And we find similar stories of ripping down Nazi flags even during the war, done by Jews. Next is oral protest. That's the biggest category, actually, of all the instances, because you can imagine ripping down a Nazi flag. If there's no witness, there's no crime, right? But if you protest, there need to be a witness. And so that's why there's way more stories are recorded. So it starts, obviously, in 1933. Many Jews especially criticized these first waves of terror and they were tried and got jail sentences. Later, Jewish men and women protested against specific laws, like the Nuremberg laws, like professional laws against certain professions. And then it spikes with Kristallnacht, with the November program. And here the main story in the book is of Henriette Schäfer, who was a Jewish woman born in 1882. And the day after the program, she went into a shop and asked the store owner, quote, "What are you saying about the fact that everything is being destroyed and the synagogues are arsoned?" End of quote. The store owner responds along the official Nazi propaganda lines. "This is the outrage of the German people because the Jews assassinated our diplomat in Paris." And then she said, and I quote, no, this is not the people. This is the government. They are all blackguards, scums, and criminals. Hitler is the biggest bandit. If I could, I would poison them all. End of quote. She received 6 months in prison for this comment under a law which I found interestingly was used widely against protest of Jews. And we always thought as historians this was only a law kind of quelling protest by communists and social democrats. But I found in all courts, kind of under this law, that Jews were tried and got prison sentences. And even during the war, we have a lot of kind of instances where Jewish women and men criticized anti-Jewish policies. For example, in Vienna, just to share a picture with you, this is Gabriele Reich. She insulted Hitler in public, criticized anti-Jewish measures, and listened to foreign broadcasts. This was in 1941, and she received in 1942 10 months in prison for these crimes. Written protest. Written protest came in two very kind of different forms. One, you might have heard about, these were petitions. A lot of Jews kind of wrote petitions to be exempted from certain measures, and we always thought they never kind of had really an impact or an effect, so they were written in vain. We never really looked at them. But if you look at them, you actually realize they also protested often in general against the persecution, and then also specifically they reclaimed, so to speak, their citizenship. We are Germans. They claimed that they were kind of contributing to the fatherland, that they were taxpayers, that they kind of helped with German culture and so on. So there was much more in these petitions than just to be accepted from certain regulations. But then there was also this other one, which is anonymous leaflets. So the total opposite, because petitions had to be signed by name. And here you have anonymous leaflets. And one of those is from Berlin in 1935. This is the police record, that's not the leaflet. That's just the document where the police reports about this. But what it said was, I quote, "Germany is a cultural disgrace today. I'm a German Jew and loyal to the emperor. In fact, the Germans should expel the foreigner Hitler. Down with Hitler, exclamation mark." End of quote. Even during the war, many Jews complained in petitions, but also in kind of anonymous leaflets. Maybe not many. I mean, many in petitions, and some with anonymous leaflets. And one story is in the book. This is the story of Benno Neuburger. He was a 71-year-old man who was a former real estate broker in Munich. And he had his children had emigrated after 1933. They moved to the United States. He couldn't get out of Munich. He tried with his wife, but they never could witness the marriages of their two children. They never saw their grandchildren, which were born in the United States. So when they could not get out and the war progressed, you all know the story when the Yellow Star was introduced. And I think this was what broke the camel's neck, the straw. So 10 days after the introduction of the Yellow Star, he took postcards, put these Hitler's post stamps on these postcards, and wrote abusive comments on them. Insulting comments like this. Here you can see this. The eternal mass murderer Hitler, disgusting, exclamation mark. The murderer, bestial, the bandit, yeah, you have to perish. That's on the post stamp. And this is the most prophetic one. It says, murderer of 5 million. And this was at the end of 1941, where kind of not really information, first of all, not so many had been murdered yet. There was no kind of knowledge about this in Germany. So this was very prophetic. He made one mistake. He had used a postcard from his old real estate firm. And that's kind of how the Gestapo got a hold of him. He was immediately transferred to Berlin to the People's Court and tried for treason. And even in Berlin, on this propaganda stage of the Berlin People's Court, he would not back down. When he was asked, why did he do this? He said, I hate Hitler because of the persecution of the Jews and because he announced that he wanted to kind of get rid of the Jews. He received the death penalty, and I forgot to show you this picture that you also see him. So this was Benno Neuburger, and if you look closely in the middle segment, you see that he has a bruise here. So this is from the torture of the Gestapo. Yeah, that's a Gestapo mark shot. Can you see this, the bruise? So in Berlin, he received the death penalty, and he was beheaded in September 1942. So he lost his life. Defying anti-Jewish laws and restrictions, this is where Hans Oppenheimer comes in, right? Many other people who kind of visited forbidden cinemas, you have read such stories. And I want to share only this one story here. Max Mannheimer, who was forced labor at the time in 1940, and he left the only note I found in a diary about these kind of individual acts. And I want to quote from this diary. He said, my home is in a wooden hut behind the tool shed. From there I go to the public park. Despite the 8 p.m. curfew, and despite the ban to visit the park. On my way, I count the signs with the slogan, "Forbidden for Jews." In total, there are 6. Later, at 11 p.m., I rip the signs out of the ground, throw some of them into the bushes and some of them into the creek. However, all my courage proved futile. The next evening, all the signs had re-emerged. And for a second time, I just did not have the courage. I'm not a hero. Just hold on for a second. He went back to check what happened. He broke the curfew again. He broke the ban to visit the park again. So I think probably most of you agree that we should kind of, in a way, disagree with his kind of self-judgment here. Okay, and the last and most surprising category is physical self-defense. I was not expecting to find a kind of mentioning of that Jewish men beat up stormtroopers. And interestingly, there are quite a few of these brawls happening. There were Jewish men who beat up neighbors who harassed other Jewish neighbors. There are quite a lot of stories of Jewish teenagers who kind of defended themselves physically against attacks and harassment by Hitler Youth, neighborhood kids, kind of classmates. And interestingly, 1/3 of the stories I found in the Shoah Foundation testimonies were actually girls who physically kind of beat up boys who were harassing them. So that was also interesting. And this is the last story I want to share. This is also one chapter in the book, is Daisy Gronowski. She was 16 years old, and this was the evening of Kristallnacht. She was originally from Berlin, but was living in a retraining camp, the Hachshara camp, to prepare kind of for the immigration to Palestine. And in the camp, they learned agricultural skills. So she was in the camp, and this camp, as many of these camps, were raided by stormtroopers during Kristallnacht. They usually smashed the whole furniture, they beat up the teachers and the male teenagers, and in her case, they also started to beat up the girls. And this is the situation she will now describe. This is a picture from 1942, so 3 years after Kristallnacht. But she will describe this now in a testimony when the stormtroopers turned to her.
The kids, you know, the youngsters, and the boys, they were bleeding. And then all of a sudden I came my turn. I said, hell, I'm not going to run. I'm going to walk. Here I am. I mean, 5'0", I'm 5'1", 5'0", and I'm a skinny little girl. And all of a sudden they wasn't any fun anymore. And I remember getting one on the back. And that was it. I just walked through very slowly looking at all of them. Now here, big tough guys. He wanted to hit a little girl. What can I do about it? Yeah, it's the attitude. And I only got hit by one. I went back, it hurt. And I got to the other line. One of them grabs me, grabs this hand, my right hand, and starts sawing into it with a rusty knife. Pocket knife type thing. Well, I learned a little trick. That's sticking my head into someone's stomach, which doesn't feel great. And I turned around to see what I could do with him. And I started fighting. And I started kicking with my legs, his legs. He wasn't very big either. He was young. Anyway, I finally managed to get my head out and under the knife. I twisted the knife out of his hand. I used the knife, I stabbed him, and I dug my head into his skull. I don't know how I did it. It was just a fast thing that they had told me. And the others didn't notice it. So a couple of the guys, the others were too busy, beaten up on their film. So a couple of the guys saw it and they dragged him underneath a bed or some kind of a sofa type thing that hadn't been kicked over so that the others wouldn't see him. He was bleeding. He wasn't dead, but he was bleeding. Anyway, that's when we took off. We ran, all of us. And they started coming run after, then give up on it.
Okay, just to explain the situation a little bit better, what she meant is she actually used the jiu-jitsu trick, which she had learned in doing a Hashomer Hatzair self-defense training back in Berlin when she was like 12, 14 years old. That's what she kind of employed there. She escaped. She was caught actually a few days later with the rest of the group. She escaped again and made it to Cologne, from where she then ended up on a Kindertransport to England, and that's how she got out and survived. So, as you can see, this kind of all of these different stories kind of show a very different kind of attitude of man and woman, young and old, during the time of the persecution in Nazi Germany. So when we define, and this is my conclusion, when we define resistance as any, like individual and group resistance, then my research could bring to light an incredible amount of courageous acts. And many are still unknown because I was a one-man show, right? I mean, I had limited capacity. There are many archives in Germany of big cities which are still untouched for this kind of research. And then we have also to kind of recognize many acts were never denunciated. And I know about this because in the testimonies of the Shoah Foundation, sometimes people talk about them. This is also not recorded in any archive. Yeah? So we only know about this from the testimonies of the survivors. So there was way more than I expected. So that one really can say it was widespread and had very different forms which we could subsume under these 5 categories, most of them. And what I really want to highlight is, from my research, we can say there was no difference when we think about gender. Yeah? There were equally women resisting as men, and often in the same way. The same is true for, I thought young people would be more prone to resistance, but no, think about the story of Benno Neuburger. He was over 70 years old, and he's not the only one. But also different beliefs, let's say professions or social status, there are no kind of patterns. So what this kind of means is everybody actually could do it, and many did. So the only thing that we can say is that over time the acts changed because of the persecution changed. Because often the individual acts were responses very directed towards certain events like Kristallnacht, certain laws, or personal kind of experiences. And since they were so manifold, this was early recognized by a rabbi in Berlin who said in the 1960s, and I quote, We were besieged in 100 of different manners, and therefore we fought back in 100 of different manners. End of quote. So some of you, I don't know, might think, are these small acts really resistance, right? But I think it is not really up to us to decide what resistance is. It is not up to the survivors what they think resistance is. In the end, what counted is that the Nazis perceived these small acts as a threat and persecuted them and punished them with jail time and sometimes concentration camp. So I think in this regard, we need to take them seriously as resistance, even if they were very small and somehow seem kind of lightly. And this is also said from a perspective from an open society, a democratic society, where we can say everything and write everything, which you couldn't do in Nazi Germany. So what I think is these acts of resistance like Hans Oppenheimer or Daisy Grunowski or Benno Neuberger need to be incorporated in our kind of standard account of Holocaust history, specifically for Nazi Germany. And I think when we look at resistance this way, we also can apply this kind of understanding to other countries. I mean, I found similar instances in Bohemia and Moravia. You will find probably in France and in Poland also a lot of these kind of similar acts of resistance by individual Jews. So what comes out of this is when we see Jewish men and women as individual resistors, we also see them as historical actors with agency. And I think this, in the end, obliterates any idea of passivity once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gruner, for this very enlightening talk. Realize when he says that these 5 stories are just the tip of the iceberg, many others might get the hint that internationally it's just the tip of the iceberg. Much, much more to be revealed yet. Keep you busy for a while.
But even nationally, it's kind of, as I said, in Germany there are many archives I haven't seen, and they need to be also kind of investigated for us.
This has been a unique opportunity for us here in Santa Barbara, this presentation. Normally, we find Professor Gruner at scholarly conferences talking to specialists, but this particular book, he tells me, is written for non-specialists in particular. So it's on sale. You might want to browse it and consider purchasing the book.
And I will sign it if you want.
Of course. There may be some questions. Please.
First, thank you for your fascinating presentation and original research in this subject. I'm thinking that the foreign press was still in Germany during these years, reporting on events. There was no coverage of these heroes who were actively resisting, reported by the foreign press. It seems as though many of these were very public acts and could have been noted by reporters at the time. I have a second question, which I may want to do after others ask their questions, please.
I mean, should you just ask a question? Just ask a question.
The second question, I'm wondering if these acts of resistance might inspire Jews today who are suffering under anti-Semitic acts around the world to create their own individual acts of resistance against the anti-Semites who attack us.
Okay, so first the question of the foreign press. They were mostly in Germany till 1938, till Kristallnacht. And then during the war, it was all censored and it was much more difficult. But the irony is the Nazis themselves actually reported about this. Yeah, so for example, not for this book, but for my previous book about Bohemia Moravia, I found actually German-speaking Nazi newspapers in Prague reported about trials against Jews doing exactly what I described here. Yeah, so, and they say, how dare the Jews do this? And yeah, they are our enemies and so on. So that's kind of like where I think it was really ironic, but it also showed that the Nazis want to make public that these are acts they will punish. So this was not by coincidence for those who were then later put on trial. They knew what they got themselves into. Yeah, they were conscious acts. This was done with, so to speak, with the knowledge that this might be of a great risk. And I think what I learned from this is I would not reduce this to Jews. I think what my research shows, different from a lot of research by psychologists, which kind of try to tease out certain character traits which you need to be kind of courageous or something. My research shows it is actually not that. Everybody can be kind of, in a way, can resist. So I think that's a general phenomenon which we need to kind of recognize. And I think what I think is more important, what it does, it takes kind of, in a way, brings down these kind of heroes from the pedestal where they are very far removed. And young people think, I never get there. I would never be courageous, I don't have the character, or whatever. And I think here we can see that's not necessary, right? Everybody is capable of doing these kind of things. And this is true for our situation in general, against any authoritarianism and so on. Yeah. Okay.
Right here.
Do you?
Yeah. Do I need it, or can you hear me?
Better for everybody to.
Right. So it's very impressive, this research you did in a pretty short time. Are all these archives sort of more or less complete as far as you know, undamaged? Yeah, if you have the time and the will, you can find all this stuff? And number two, I was curious, it wasn't quite clear. Is all the documentation from state and Gestapo reports, or have you had any opportunity to correlate from the resistors somehow, some diary they left or something like that?
Yeah, so let me start with the last one. So I said diaries are not a good source for this because people thought if somebody finds the diary, they get in trouble. So this was the only quote which I kind of cited, was the only thing I found in diaries. I looked quite a bit. Letters is very similar. There was censorship, and so in this way, most of the sources are either post-war testimonies, like interviews with survivors, or perpetrator records, like police and courts. Yeah, so this is kind of these two are there. And the first one, so the archives, the situation is, while there is a lot of documentation, it is not complete because of bombings, the war, and everything. So to give you one example, I started my research in Berlin, and there is this, one of these special courts which tried Jews under this law from 1934. There are 2,000 files in the archive from this special court in Berlin. But they had more than 10,000 trials. So it's just 1/5 of the actual trials. But within these 2,000, I found several dozens kind of regarding Jews. So you can imagine in the lost ones, there might have been also some. And the same is true for other records. Sometimes we don't have any records from the special courts. In other cases, we have. And the same is, even the situation is worse for police records. For example, the very first trace of this kind of resistance I found in the police logbook from a police station in Berlin, where policemen write down what they witnessed every day, whom they arrested, what they had to do. And I went through and I thought I find kind of how they enforce anti-Jewish regulations. And then it hit me, there was this half a page where somebody was denunciated and arrested for public protest against the persecution. And this is how I started my research. And it was not a short time, it was 12 years. So this is kind of, it took a while, I have to say. And it's really systematic research. And I think you will find more if you go to other archives, if you are kind of with this sensitivity to look out for these things. I think it took also for me, with this first document, to realize I never thought about that this was actually possible, right? And when I changed my perspective, then suddenly everywhere it was popping up. No.
Often research happens that way. When you're a scholar, you find something, you crack open one little thing, and you discover that it's huge.
Yeah, I appreciate your work, especially when I was in Israel years ago. Young Israelis would wonder why were Jews going like sheep to the slaughter, not fighting back. And in regards to fighting back, you know, you've covered things up to like 1942. At what point were weapons coming into play? And I understand you were just talking about Germany, but whether from the partisans or from Palestine, at what point did it move from nonviolence, so it really didn't develop that much in Germany?
I mean, there was also organized group resistance in Germany. There is a very famous group, which is the Haberbaum group. These were all leftist, communist Jews in Berlin who were forced laborers and did leaflet action, sabotage on the workplace, and later arsoned a propaganda exhibit in the center of Berlin. They used incendiary devices. So you can call this kind of armed, right? The problem in Germany was that arms were actually taken from Jews. Right before Kristallnacht, there was an order to confiscate any kind of weapon until kind of knives, yeah? Which could be used to defend himself or to kind of hurt somebody. And Jews, even who had registered like guns for hunting or sport, were actually arrested because they possessed these weapons, because they thought they didn't need to submit them because they had kind of official registration. So these I could find actually in the police logbooks too, these kind of arrests of these people. So in a way, Jews in Germany were pretty much disarmed in this way, and so it was much more difficult to create this kind of resistance. In Poland and France, it's different, dependent on the collaboration of non-Jewish Poles and so on.
Right, you're front. Microphone's coming.
The Nazis used these acts of resistance as propaganda to show, see what the Jews do, how thankful they are for the way, etc. Was it used? Because I'm thinking of today, where you have situations where Israel is used as kind of compared with the way Israel is seen by it's anti-Semitic, but that's how it is. It's where they report, quote, mistreatment of civilians and children in Gaza. So, I mean, is it used today to also, well, because it's kind of, here are the Jews used as, the Israelis used as abusing and acting against humanity. Today you have also not just, but against crimes against humanity. You have now reports, I'm sure. Did you look at them, how they use it?
No, I mean, this is up to other people to decide what crimes against humanity are. What I look into, at the time, the Nazis did use this against Jews. For example, the group which I just mentioned, Haberbaum in Berlin, they all went on trial and all got the death penalty. And they had the Nazis usually hang big red posters for everybody who got the death penalty. And in this case, they actually made clear that these were Jews, and that they kind of tried to attack the German state. And that was visible in Berlin, everywhere. They had these big red, kind of really yelling red posters. And then they had also newspaper reports where they did the same. So in a way, while they didn't want to widely publicize, I think, they tried to make this kind of known that they will punish this, and they also tried to, in a way, quell that the Jews would not do this, right? That they are aware of the consequences.
How on earth did the Germans identify someone as being Jewish? I mean,
How they identify them?
yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, it was often kind of not possible until they were publicly marked. And this happened in various ways. First, they had to wear these ID cards which were marked, and they had to adopt the middle names, the Sarah and Israel, which, by the way, I didn't mention. But this is also what I found very interesting. The adoption of these names, we always thought was automatic. It was not. So in the archives, you find actually quite a few files where Jewish women and men resisted to adopt these middle names. And this is only possible because the German name law requests that you file a form. You have to pay 3 Reichsmark, and then practically you apply to adopt. And many just refused, even when they were kind of summoned to the police station. And so I found these cases, and here's interesting, when we think about trends and tendencies, this is the only one where age comes in. Age, because the majority I have seen of these resistors who didn't want to use the adopted names were actually elderly people. I think they didn't want to give up their life with their names. Young people didn't care probably so much. So this was interesting that most of these files were from elderly people. And sometimes they got away with this, interestingly, and this speaks to the point, how did they recognize them? So I found files, for example, in Leipzig, there was a woman, Ida Schneider, she was 73 years old. She lived unrecognized as a Jew for 2.5 years, until 1941, way into the war, when she then was discovered and denunciated. And so in some cases, people actually could kind of circumvent these, but others got punished when they were denunciated. And even for this small kind of resistance not to file, you would go to jail. Yeah? So this was not a Cavalier's thing. This was kind of heavy. Yeah? And later then the Yellow Star. But before that, this was really not really notable unless people knew or suspected. This also led to kind of strange things. For example, in 1935, I mentioned the riots in Berlin. There are police reports that Egyptian people and Turkish people were actually beaten up on the street because people assumed they were Jews. Yeah.
We also had that anomalous quote from an older man who was protesting that he was a loyal German, loyal to the emperor, who had been gone for 20 years.
I know.
Let's maybe take one more, and if there are further questions, you can speak with Professor Gruner after, and enjoy some refreshment.
Hi, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm so interested in this subject. I watch movies all the time with various ways that people resist. And I know there was a fabulous Polish movie. They had a real underground resistance movement. And I'm wondering in Germany if they also had that. They must have, I would think.
I mean, the problem was the surveillance was much better, much deeper in Germany than it was in Poland or in the occupied territories. However, there were also, how can I say this, limits to the surveillance. And because after the war, Germans kind of often said, oh, the Gestapo was almighty, we couldn't do anything. The Gestapo had limited staff. Yeah, so they had 20,000 people in Germany and you had 60,000 towns. Just saying. Yeah. So they were not everywhere. They lived on denunciations from individuals, but actually more from institutions also in this way. So there was a lot of this. And remind me of the question again. I kind of got distracted.
Oh, did they have big resistance groups?
Oh, the groups. Yeah, so in Germany, because of the surveillance, there were not so many Jewish resistance groups. There were a few, like the Baum group, then there was another group in Berlin of Jews who went into hiding and then organized themselves in hiding, helping other Jews. But what we have is actually Daisy Grunovsky, before she went to the retraining camp, as a 15-year-old, actually did messenger service for a communist underground group. So there were Jews actually often from Hashomer Hatzair collaborating with communist or leftist resistance groups. So there is a number from a colleague who investigated this. In total, they estimate 3,000 Jews were actually in some way involved in organized leftist resistance in Germany proper. That's quite a lot, actually. Yeah. And I found one interview, which I didn't have here, which actually speaks to this. There's one in the Shoah Foundation testimonies, a male survivor who talks about that he had some chemical expertise and he produced for one leftist resistance group bombs. So he kind of composed bombs for them. Yeah. But he didn't know the group. This was so kind of done in secret that he only knew one person, and then the person knew another person, so he didn't know about the extent of the group, what they did, or anything. Yeah.
And then there was White Rose. So,
yeah, that's a non-Jewish group. Yeah. But you see, what I feel now is we put so much emphasis on the White Rose, which was really great. But actually, you have very similar things, like say from the Jewish side too, which is not recognized yet. Yeah. If I may just introduce the other thing. So if you are interested in these kind of things, so as he mentioned, I'm leading a research center at USC, and we have international fellowship, and we bring the youngest and brightest Holocaust scholars to USC for residency, and they usually present their research. And we live stream these events, but also we put them on a YouTube channel of our center, where we have now 150 talks, which you can, with the newest kind of cutting edge research on the Holocaust and on other genocides, but it's mainly the Holocaust. So I want to just throw this out. I have here some flyers, which you can see. They are next to the books. And then I wanted to ask you for one thing. I'm co-founder of a project which is a multi-institutional project in Germany, which searches for the last remaining photographs of Nazi mass deportations. That means the deportations from 1941, 1942, 1943. And we exist now for 3 years as a collaborative project, and we were able to double the number of cities where we have now visual evidence of the mass deportations from 27 to 60. But we not only gather these, we publish them on a website, we analyze them, we tell the stories of these deportations, and the most important thing is we try to identify the people on these photographs. And we tell their stories. And we have, and so now, up to now, we identified 280 persons and tell their stories. And I want to just show you this because, for really important reasons. Most of the photographs we found in German archives, in some museums, but some of them we found actually here in the United States. And this has to do that some liberators took souvenirs from Nazi offices. That's how some of these deportation photos actually got into the United States. Sometimes also survivors went back after the war, and then some neighbor from their town said, oh, by the way, your parents are on this photograph, I give you this photograph. So what I want to kind of plant this kind of idea in your head, if anybody has family or descendants who are survivors from Germany, and by the way, in the future, the next step is actually to branch out. We now include Austria, and the next step will be the Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, and the Czech Republic. And in the future, we want to do this as a European project. So if anybody has any kind of photograph of deportations, please contact my project. And I show you this because it's really also for teaching purposes, a really great tool. So let's see if I can do this now. Somehow the mouse, here, okay. Okay. So this is the website, and it has two components. One is the image atlas, where you can find all these images and the stories. And this other one is still in German, but we will have a, hopefully, depends on funding, an English version. That's actually a video game where high school students and students can go into an attic and kind of find clues and learn about one deportation from one German town, finding the photographs and piecing the puzzle together. But just to show you the atlas, so you can actually either go to the photographs or you can go to the map. Oh, I think you mute us here. Even my own project does this annoying thing with the... So you see here, how do I scroll with this? So you see this, and when you click on this, you can actually enlarge the map, and then you see, and it brings you to the street where the photo was taken. Yeah? So then you see, oops, and then this is the photo, and this is, by the way, one of the photographs we found here in the United States. This is sheer coincidence, this was not planned, but this is from Halberstadt, and I found this in the interviews of the Shoah Foundation, because a survivor at the end, usually they share family pictures, and one survivor showed this because the parents are actually right in front here on the first on the deportation. And so we learn also from descendants of families about people in these photographs, and we are depending actually on their knowledge to get details about the people who were deported. Yeah. So it's very easy, lastscene.org, if you want to have a look, if you want to also, somebody wants to use it for teaching, but my main purpose is spread the word, maybe we find some more photographs. Thank you. There are also some posters like that.
As long as I have everybody together, let me just announce the next event. It's going to be on February the 2nd. Again, it is a Zoom webinar led by Hazia Diner from New York University, who's going to speak on her brand new book, Opening Doors, The Unlikely Alliance Between the Irish and the Jews in America. Fresh off the press, 2024, Unlikely Alliance Between the Jews and the Irish who preceded them in immigrating to the United States. So you'll want to see a Zoom webinar. You'll be receiving a flyer about it as per usual in the mailing list. So please enjoy what we've got for you afterwards, and feel free to purchase a book or speak to Professor Bruce. Thank you very much for coming out.